Samurai were not only warriors, but guardians of Japan's most sacred treasures, hidden from sight for over 1,000 years. These relics shaped the destinies of emperors and the battles fought in their name, surviving wars, betrayals, and even the sea itself. From the legendary Genpei War to secret struggles between rival courts, the treasures witnessed acts of loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. Tonight, we uncover the hidden history of these artifacts and the samurai who protected them, where power, honor, and mystery collide. In old Japan, a class of warriors lived by honor, loyalty, and personal pride. They were the samurai. Their lives were not easy. Every day brought battles, service to their lords, and tests of courage. To die in battle was not shame. It was the highest honor a samurai could achieve. Their swords were deadly, their minds sharp, and their reputation even more important. Every action could make a name remembered for generations, or erased from memory. The samurai lived in a world where respect and bravery were everything, and every choice could define their story forever. But loyalty alone did not drive them. Samurai wanted to be remembered. They wanted to stand out, not as one among many, but as the warrior who could inspire awe. Stories of their bravery reveal a subtle truth. Devotion had limits when the chance for glory appeared. They sought recognition, not just for obedience, but for personal skill and courage. Every battle, every duel, every moment of daring was a chance to prove themselves. A samurai's life was a stage, and every action could become legend. Their lives were full of tension. They had to respect tradition and serve their lords, yet also seize every opportunity to shine. This balance shaped them, forcing choices that could define a lifetime. Every decision, whether on the battlefield or in daily life, mattered. The world they lived in demanded both loyalty and ambition, stability and courage. The samurai were not static. They adapted, fought, and acted with intelligence and precision, leaving stories that would be told for centuries. The samurai evolved over centuries. In the beginning, they protected noble estates and families. As time passed, they became the country's strongest warriors, shaping wars and history itself. Yet the world changed. By the 19th century, Japan was moving in new directions. The old ways were ending. Some samurai gave up their swords, took new jobs, or adapted to modern life. From warriors to officials, from top knots to top hats, their world transformed, but their spirit endured. From the first battles to their final days, the samurai's story is one of courage, struggle, and ambition. They lived by honor and loyalty, yet also sought personal glory. Every fight, every brave act, every choice left a mark on history. Samurai were more than soldiers, they were legends. And even today, their lives continue to inspire, showing the power of courage, pride, and determination across centuries. Any story of the samurai must begin at the very roots of Japanese warfare. The first signs of conflict appear in the 1st centuries AD, though the records are sparse. Contemporary Chinese chronicles reveal that Japan was already involved in Korean affairs. Japanese forces joined the wars between the 3 rival kingdoms, Baekje, Koguryo, and Silla. These early expeditions were fought on foot, with bows, swords, and spears. Around 400 AD, a Japanese army sent to aid Baekje met cavalry for the first time, facing a devastating defeat. Horses had been used as pack animals in Japan, but this encounter would leave a deep mark on Japanese military thinking. Within a century, horseback riding became common in Japan. Mounted warriors began traveling to Korea, signaling a new era in Japanese warfare. These campaigns were possible because a single clan had risen above the rest within Japan itself. Known as the Yamato, they are the ancestors of the Japanese imperial line. The exact historical processes that gave them dominance are unclear, though archaeology provides hints. The origins of the imperial line are intertwined with myth, recorded in the Kojiki 712 and the Nihongi 720. These tales of gods and heroes give little hint of real warfare, but allegories, like deities slaying serpents, suggest struggles between clans. The most famous myth central to the imperial cult tells how Amaterasu, the sun goddess, sent her grandson to rule the land of luxuriant rice fields. Beyond myth, the power of these early rulers is visible even today in the colossal Kofun tombs. Built between the 4th and 7th centuries, these keyhole-shaped mounds dominate the landscape. Some stand as islands in lakes. Inside were buried armor, weapons, bronze mirrors, and jewels, treasures recovered from the few tombs excavated. Around the tombs, Haniwa clay figures depicted soldiers, servants, and animals, perhaps once substitutes for human sacrifice. The true origins of the Yamato line remain debated. Some scholars point to similarities between Kofun grave goods and contemporary Korean burials, suggesting that Japan's first emperors may have come from Korea, asserting dominance through cavalry warfare. This horse rider theory challenges the uniqueness of the imperial line and has been unpopular with nationalists. Legends respond with counter-narratives, like the tale of Empress Jingo leading an invasion of Korea while pregnant, later giving birth to Emperor Ojin, deified as Hachiman, god of war. Rival clans, the Uji, repeatedly challenged Yamato rule, but by the 7th century, the imperial line was secure. In 646, the Taika reforms sought to consolidate power. The surviving clans were stripped of independent authority, and all of Japan came under imperial control. Establishing a permanent capital was a priority, finally achieved at Nara in 710, after several false starts. Buddhism, introduced 2 centuries earlier, flourished under these settled conditions. The government, modeled on Tang China, provided stability. Any rebellion, whether from disgruntled clans or the recently subdued Emishi in the north, was dealt with swiftly. In 894, Kyoto became the new imperial capital, a status it would retain until 1868, anchoring the foundations upon which the samurai would later rise. The way war was fought during the Nara and Heian periods would shape Japan's destiny and give birth to the samurai. When Japan first modeled its army on China, it followed the same pattern, a force made up of peasant conscripts. But this system quickly broke down. It was too slow, too weak, and unfit for Japan's growing unrest. The imperial court in Nara and later in Kyoto needed warriors who could act fast and fight hard. So the government began to hire local strongmen, granting them commissions to suppress rebels and rewarding them handsomely for success. What began as a short-term solution became something far more dangerous. Instead of controlling the clans that had once challenged it, the court now empowered them. These powerful families raised their own forces, elite mounted warriors skilled with bow and sword, supported by farmers turned soldiers. They were not yet called samurai, but their way of fighting, their loyalty to local lords rather than the emperor, marked the beginning of a new warrior class. The 9th century brought Japan to its knees. Famine, disease, and economic collapse spread misery across the land. With hardship came anger, against the court, against taxes, against distant rulers who no longer seemed in control. Local uprisings, bandit raids, and violent disputes erupted across the provinces, and when chaos spread too far, the imperial court had no choice but to turn to the very warlords it had empowered. By the start of the 10th century, these men, provincial governors and clan leaders, were given wide authority to raise troops, crush disorder, and rule their regions as they saw fit. They taxed the land, kept the spoils, and grew in strength. Family ties to the court, rewards for loyalty, and rivalry over power only deepened this system. The rich became richer, the strong became stronger, and the central government began to fade into the background. Out of this imbalance, the first true samurai emerged, warriors born of necessity, ambition, and the slow collapse of imperial control. The 10th century marked a turning point in Japanese history, the moment when the word samurai first appeared. It meant those who serve, and at first, it described men who traveled to the capital to perform guard duty for the imperial court. But the meaning soon expanded. Over time, samurai came to describe any warrior serving a powerful lord, The term gained prestige, becoming tied to family lines and noble heritage. Some samurai descended from ancient clans, the Uji. Others were new families rising through skill and bravery. Their names and their bloodlines became symbols of honor, courage, and power. By serving the court in Kyoto, these warrior families grew rich and influential. Their strength soon overshadowed the court itself. By the 11th century, two great clans stood above all others, the Taira and the Minamoto. For a century, their rivalry would dominate Japan. Both clans fought on opposing sides in the Hogan Rebellion of 1156, a violent struggle over imperial succession. When another dispute arose 4 years later, the two houses faced each other again. The Taira triumphed in the Heiji Rebellion of 1160, destroying many of their Minamoto rivals. But they made one fatal mistake. They spared a few Minamoto children. In 1180, those survivors returned for revenge. The conflict began with the Battle of Uji and erupted into a full-scale civil war, the Genpei War. Its name came from the Chinese readings of their family names, Gen for Minamoto and Hei for Taira. The Genpei War became the defining epic of samurai history. Its battles, Uji, Ichinotani, Yashima, and Dan no Ura, set the standards of courage and loyalty that would guide samurai for centuries. Poets and painters turned the war into legend. Tales of duels, archery, loyalty, and sacrifice became the moral foundation of the warrior class. Every value the samurai held sacred, bravery, skill, devotion, even ritual suicide, found its roots in this war. When the war ended, it reshaped Japan forever. In 1192, Minamoto no Yoritomo claimed victory and took a new title, Shogun, the supreme military commander. The title had once been temporary, granted by the emperor only in times of rebellion. But Yoritomo made it permanent. For the first time, a samurai ruled Japan, not as a servant of the emperor, but as its true master. His government became known as the Bakufu, the tent government, named after the curtains surrounding a general's command post. The emperor remained on the throne, but his role was now ceremonial, his power symbolic. Real authority rested with the shogun and his family. The Minamoto clan had created a new order, one that would endure for more than 700 years. Japan was no longer ruled by courtiers and poets. It was now the realm of warriors. The age of the samurai had truly begun. The triumph of the Minamoto was short-lived. Yoritomo, the founder of Japan's first shogunate, died suddenly in 1199, thrown from his horse. Without his leadership, the Minamoto dynasty collapsed within 2 generations. Power passed into the hands of the Hojo family, who ruled from behind the scenes. Out of respect for tradition, they did not claim the title of shogun themselves. Instead, they ruled as shikken, regents to puppet shoguns who carried the Minamoto name. It was the Hojo regency, not the Minamoto Bakufu, that faced the first major challenge to samurai rule, an imperial attempt to reclaim power in 1221. The rebellion was swiftly crushed, yet the true test of Japan's survival came not from within, but from across the sea. By the 13th century, a new power dominated Asia, the Mongols. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, they had swept from the steppes across Asia and into Europe, conquering everything from Korea to Poland. Inevitably, Japan became their next target. In 1274, Mongol forces launched their first assault, landing on Kyushu. The samurai met them with ferocity, but it was only the beginning. In 1281, the Mongols returned, this time with an enormous invasion fleet. The Japanese fought desperately, but their salvation came from the sky. A massive typhoon struck the Mongol ships as they lay anchored off the coast, tearing the fleet apart. The storm was hailed as kamikaze, the divine wind. It was said the gods themselves had risen to protect Japan. This miracle became more than legend. It became identity. The kamikaze was proof that Japan was a sacred land, guarded by fate and the courage of its warriors. Centuries later, in 1945, the word would be revived for another generation of warriors who believed they too were sacrificing themselves to defend their homeland. After the Mongol threat faded, new turmoil rose from within. In the 14th century, Emperor Go-Daigo launched a bold campaign to restore imperial rule. His rebellion, known as the Nanbokucho Wars, the wars between the courts, was a bloody struggle that split Japan between two rival emperors. Though Go-Daigo ultimately failed, his uprising gave birth to new legends. Among them was one name that would echo through the centuries: Kusunoki Masashige. Masashige became the embodiment of samurai virtue, intelligent, loyal, and utterly devoted to his emperor. He fought brilliantly, but when Go-Daigo ignored his warnings at Minatogawa in 1336, defeat became inevitable. Rather than flee, Masashige chose to die by his own hand. His sacrifice immortalized him as the model samurai, obedient unto death, faithful beyond reason. When Japan's emperors reclaimed power in the 19th century, Kusunoki's statue stood as the ideal every loyal samurai was expected to follow. Go-Daigo's failure also reshaped Japan's political order. When the Hojo regents fell, the Ashikaga clan, descendants of the Minamoto, seized control. They restored the Bakufu and ruled as shoguns for nearly 2 centuries. Yet the same old flaw remained: too many ambitious lords, too many swords, and not enough loyalty. By the 15th century, Japan had fractured again. Clan rivalries erupted constantly. Each minor feud settled in blood. The chaos reached its breaking point in the Onin War, 1467-1476, a civil conflict that tore Kyoto apart. The capital burned, the shogunate collapsed into disgrace, and Japan descended into a century of anarchy. The age of warring states, Sengoku Jidai, was about to begin. The Onin War shattered Japan's fragile unity and plunged the nation into a century and a half of chaos, an age now known as the Sengoku Jidai, the period of warring states. The term was borrowed from Chinese history, but Japan's wars were far more personal. These weren't states battling for borders. They were families, clans, and warlords fighting for sheer dominance. The men who led this age called themselves daimyo, great names, and they lived up to it. Figures like Takeda Shingen, Uesugi Kenshin, and Date Masamune carved reputations that eclipsed even the heroes of the Genpei War. But the Sengoku was not an era for romance. It was an era of blood, cunning, and survival. The world of the samurai evolved brutally. The old noble image of single combat gave way to mass warfare. Victory no longer belonged to the most honorable, but to the most organized. Successful daimyo built large armies filled with ashigaru, foot soldiers trained to fight with bows, spears, and eventually guns. Gunpowder changed everything. Crude Chinese firearms had existed for decades, but in 1543, a storm brought a Portuguese ship, and with it, the arquebus, to Japanese shores. Within years, Japan was manufacturing its own weapons and mastering them with terrifying efficiency. The true revolution came when one man saw how to use them, not as novelties, but as instruments of strategy. Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga understood war as mathematics. He drilled his men to fight in volleys, transforming samurai warfare into something mechanical, relentless, and deadly. His victory at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575 proved that discipline could shatter even the most glorious cavalry charge. The age of the sword was ending. The age of the gun had begun. But Nobunaga's ambition reached beyond tactics. He sought to unify Japan. In 1568, he marched into Kyoto, seized the capital, and effectively abolished the shogunate. For the first time in centuries, a single man looked capable of ending the chaos. Then in 1582, betrayal struck. Cornered by his own general, Nobunaga took his life in flames at Honnoji. From the ashes rose an unlikely successor, a man of peasant birth who had clawed his way up from foot soldier to general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Brilliant, cunning, and pragmatic, Hideyoshi avenged Nobunaga's death within months. Through a combination of ruthless warfare and deft diplomacy, He united Japan's fractious lords one by one, defeating some, winning others as allies. Even the powerful Tokugawa Ieyasu, beaten by Hideyoshi at Nagakute in 1584, recognized the winds of change and pledged his loyalty. One by one, the great daimyo submitted. Hideyoshi conquered Shikoku in 1585, subdued Kyushu in 1587, and by 1591, the entire nation lay under his rule. Yet despite commanding more power than any shogun before him, Hideyoshi could not claim the title himself. His low birth made that impossible. Still, he ruled Japan absolutely. And like many rulers before him, he made the same fatal mistake. He sought glory beyond his borders. In 1592, Hideyoshi launched an invasion of Korea, the first step, he believed, in conquering Ming China. But his dream met disaster. Korean resistance, aided by the Chinese, turned the campaign into a nightmare. The famed turtle ships of Admiral Yi Sun-sin dominated the seas, cutting off Japanese supply lines. Guerrilla fighters harassed the invaders at every turn. By 1598, after 6 years of futile bloodshed, the Japanese army limped home. Hideyoshi himself died that same year, his grand vision of a Japanese empire reduced to ashes. He had unified Japan, but not secured its future. Because waiting patiently in the shadows, his former rival Tokugawa Ieyasu was preparing to do what neither Nobunaga nor Hideyoshi had managed: end the age of war forever. This passage is a perfect bridge between mythology and historical legitimacy in Japan. It shifts from the battlefield history of the samurai to the sacred symbolism that underpinned Japanese kingship. Let me restate and refine it in B2 C1 level English, keeping the tone factual yet fluent and easier to process without losing its academic weight. Anyone who has waited in line to see the crown jewels at the Tower of London knows that no trip to a capital city feels complete without viewing a nation's royal treasures. These priceless objects, guarded behind glass, sparkling with gold and gems, are not only symbols of power, but also testaments to survival. However, Japan is a striking exception. No visitor to Tokyo or Kyoto can ever hope to see the Japanese imperial regalia. Their existence is acknowledged, their locations known, but they have remained sealed away for over 1,000 years, untouched, unseen, and wrapped in layers of silk and boxes. Remarkably, not even the emperor himself lays eyes on them during his enthronement ceremony. No Japanese ruler has seen his own regalia since the 12th century. Despite this invisibility, the imperial treasures have always held immense importance. The three sacred items, the mirror, the sword, and the jewel, are far more than royal ornaments. They represent the divine authority of the emperor, believed to have been passed down from the sun goddess Amaterasu herself. Together, they form the spiritual foundation of Japanese monarchy, eternal, unbroken, and sacred. A 14th century scholar, Kitabatake Chikafusa, described it this way: "Heaven and earth change not, sun and moon keep their light. Even more do the three sacred treasures endure, and that which is eternal is the imperial throne that preserves our nation." These treasures were not only symbols of legitimacy, but also thought to possess protective, almost magical power. They shielded their holder from evil, including at times human evil in the form of political rivals. In such moments, the regalia determined more than divine right. They decided who was the true emperor. The logic was simple. Whoever possessed the imperial regalia was the rightful ruler. Yet in practice, it wasn't always that clear. During early samurai history, succession disputes often involved replicas of the regalia, not the original items. Thus, political struggles became a strange blend of spiritual and material warfare, where both the true emperor and the true treasures had to be identified. In the ancient chronicles of Japan, the first written mention of the imperial regalia appears in the creation myths of the Yamato rulers. These stories, preserved in the Kojiki and Nihongi, describe a world where gods shaped heaven and earth. and where the divine lineage of Japan's emperors began. Amaterasu, the radiant goddess of the sun, ruled the heavens. But when her unruly brother, Susanoo, unleashed chaos and destruction, she fled in terror, hiding herself inside a cave. Darkness fell upon the world. The other kami, the deities, panicked. They tried everything to lure her out, yet the world remained cloaked in shadow. Finally, they devised a ruse. A mirror was hung from a sacred tree beside a shining jewel. Then one of the goddesses began to dance, wildly, joyfully, and with such abandon that laughter echoed through the heavens. Amaterasu, curious and confused, peeked from her cave. At that moment, she caught sight of her own reflection in the mirror and mistook it for a rival deity brighter than herself. As she stepped forward in surprise, the gods seized the moment. They pulled her from the cave, and the world was flooded once more with light. The mirror and the jewel that restored sunlight to the world became two of the sacred treasures of Japan, the first symbols of divine power and imperial legitimacy. The third treasure would come later, born from battle and blood. In the land of Izumo, a monstrous serpent, with 8 heads and 8 tails, terrorized the land. The storm god Susanoo vowed to slay it. He offered the creature barrels of rice wine, and when the serpent drank itself into a stupor, he struck. One by one he severed its heads, until his sword struck something hard inside the creature's tail. Buried within was a blade of divine craftsmanship, a sword unlike any other. Susanoo named it Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi, the sword of the gathering clouds, and offered it to his sister, Amaterasu, as an act of reconciliation. In time, Amaterasu presented the sword, along with the mirror and jewel, to her grandson, Ninigi, as he descended from the heavens to rule the earth. Ninigi's grandson, Jimmu, remembered as Japan's first emperor, traditionally dated to 660 BC, received these 3 treasures as symbols of his divine right to rule. From that moment, they became the eternal regalia of Japan's emperors: the mirror for wisdom, the jewel for benevolence, and the sword for valor. Only once, according to legend, was the sacred sword used in war. Prince Yamato, son of Emperor Keiko, was given the sword by the high priestess of Ise before setting out on campaign. When enemies trapped him in a grassy plain and set it ablaze, Yamato used the divine blade to cut through the flames, carving a path to freedom. From that day, the Cloud Cluster sword gained a new name: Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. And with it, the mythic regalia of Japan were complete: mirror, jewel, and sword, each a divine legacy from the gods, carried through generations as the ultimate symbols of imperial power. Long before Japan's emperors ruled from grand palaces, they lived with deep fear and reverence toward the 3 sacred treasures: the mirror, the sword, and the jewel. These were not just royal ornaments, they were believed to hold divine power. Emperor Sujin, who ruled around the 1st century BC, felt increasingly uneasy living so close to them. The mirror and sword were said to carry the spirit of the sun goddess Amaterasu, and their presence became almost unbearable. To protect both himself and the sacred relics, Sujin ordered copies, exact replicas, to be made. He kept these near him as symbols of his authority, while the originals were moved to a safer and holier place in Yamato province. Later, his son, Emperor Suinin, transferred the original mirror and sword to the Grand Shrine of Ise, where they have remained for centuries. From that time, the replicas, not the originals, became the official regalia of the Japanese emperors. Every new ruler received them during the enthronement ceremony as proof that he was the true and divine sovereign of Japan. But centuries of time and disaster would take their toll. Fires, earthquakes, and wars damaged the sacred items again and again. In 1040, for example, the replica mirror was almost completely destroyed by fire. Yet no one dared to repair it. People believed that touching or fixing a divine object would be more disrespectful than leaving it broken. Even in their damaged form, the regalia continued to protect the imperial line. They became symbols not of perfection, but of eternity, proof that the spirit of Japan's emperors could endure every disaster, just like the cracked and scarred treasures they inherited. The destruction caused by human hands began with the Genpei War, 1180–1185, a brutal civil war between two powerful clans, the Taira and the Minamoto. This conflict would shape the future of Japan, ending with the rise of the first shogun, a military ruler who would overshadow the emperor himself. But while the war raged, the question of who possessed the imperial regalia became a matter of life and death. The mirror, the sword, and the jewel were not just symbols, they were the divine proof of the emperor's legitimacy. Whoever held them claimed heaven's support. The situation was made even more complex by Japan's political customs. Retired emperors often continued to control the government from behind the scenes, known as cloistered emperors. In 1180, one such emperor, Go Shirakawa, secretly supported his son Prince Mochihito in a rebellion against his own grandson, Emperor Antoku, who was protected by the Taira clan. The Minamoto clan fought for Mochihito's claim, but lost the Battle of Uji. Yet the war was far from over. The young Minamoto general Yoshitsune, famous for his intelligence and courage, began turning the tide. In 1184, he attacked the Taira's stronghold at Ichinotani, near modern-day Kobe, from behind, a daring move that forced them to flee. The Taira retreated first to Yashima, an island off Shikoku, and then to their final refuge near Dan-no-ura, at the southern tip of Honshu. It was there in 1185 that the final battle took place, a sea battle unlike any other. On board one of the Taira ships was the 8-year-old Emperor Antoku, carrying with him the sacred mirror, the sword, and the jewel, the three symbols of divine power. The Minamoto and Taira warriors shot arrows from their ships as if they were fighting on land. Both sides believed the outcome would decide not only Japan's future, but also which side the gods favored. At first, the Taira clan held the advantage. The morning tide in the narrow straits of Dan-no-ura flowed in their favor, and their commander, Taira no Tomomori, an experienced seaman, used the current to trap the Minamoto fleet. The battle began with fierce archery and close combat as samurai boarded each other's ships, fighting with swords and daggers at arm's length. But by late morning, the tide suddenly turned, literally. The current began to flow the opposite way, out toward the sea, giving the Minamoto the upper hand. Their commander quickly exploited the change, pushing forward as the Taira ships lost formation. Then came betrayal. Miura Yoshizumi, one of the Taira's supposed allies, switched sides and attacked from behind. He also revealed which ship carried the young Emperor Antoku, allowing the Minamoto to focus their assault on the true royal vessel. Under heavy fire, the Taira fleet began to break apart. Arrows rained down on the rowers and helmsmen, and soon their ships were drifting helplessly with the current. Realizing all was lost, Emperor Antoku's grandmother, Ni no Ama, prepared to act. Wearing mourning robes, she placed the sacred jewel under her arm and the sacred sword in her belt. Taking the child emperor in her arms, she whispered, "In the depths of the ocean, we have a capital." Then she leapt into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves with the emperor and 2 of the 3 imperial treasures. Moments later, another attendant tried to follow her, carrying the sacred mirror. But before she could jump, an arrow struck her garment, pinning her to the ship's side. As Minamoto soldiers tried to open the chest containing the mirror, one of them suddenly went blind and blood poured from his nose, a terrifying sign that the sacred object must never be seen by human eyes. When defeat was certain, many Taira warriors chose suicide over capture. Some tied anchors to their bodies and sank into the sea. Others used their enemies as weights to pull them under. By the end, the waters of Dan-no-ura ran red, not only with blood, but with the crimson banners of the fallen Taira clan, drifting and torn by the tide. The sea itself became a grave for Japan's imperial line and one of the most haunting images in samurai history. Among the many haunting images of the Battle of Dan-no-ura, one has lived on in Japanese folklore: the Heike crabs. These small crabs, found in the waters where the Taira clan perished, have shells that resemble the faces of fallen samurai. Locals say their spirits were reborn in the sea, yet the most mysterious legacy of Dan no Ura was not the crabs, but the loss of one of Japan's 3 sacred treasures. The sacred jewel was miraculously recovered from the waves, and the sacred mirror seemed to defend itself from human touch. But the replica sacred sword, symbol of imperial authority, was lost forever. The Heike Monogatari, the great epic of the war, records the moment simply: "At the hour of the rat, the sacred mirror and the sacred gem were handed to the Daijokan. The sacred sword was lost, but the sacred gem, still in its casket, floated upon the waves and was recovered by Kataoka no Taro Tsuneharu." Later writings, collected in the Book of Swords, added a more mystical explanation. Divers searched the sea for days, but no trace of the sword could be found. According to legend, the Dragon King of the Deep had claimed it and taken it to his palace beneath the waves. For a time, the loss created a spiritual crisis. From 1190 to 1210, a replacement sword from the imperial armory, called Hino Omashi no Goken, the sword of the imperial day room, was used for imperial enthronement. Then, during the reign of Emperor Go-Tsuchi Mikado, a priest at the Grand Shrine of Ise received a divine revelation from the sun goddess Amaterasu. She declared that a sword from the Ise treasure house should forever serve in the emperor's rites. Since 1210, that sacred blade has been used in every Japanese enthronement ceremony, a silent successor to the sword lost beneath the crimson waters of Dan no Ura. More than a century passed before Japan was once again thrown into turmoil, this time by the attempt at imperial restoration led by Emperor Go-Daigo. For over 50 years, the nation was divided between 2 rival courts: the northern court, residing in the imperial palace in Kyoto, and the southern court, exiled to the mountains of Yoshino in present-day Nara. Once again, the imperial regalia became central to the struggle. They were symbols of legitimacy, capable of swaying loyalty, yet the situation was far more complex than at Dan no Ura. The question of who possessed the original regalia, which sets of replicas, and the sacred replacement sword of 1210 all collided to create a web of political and spiritual intrigue. When Go-Daigo's plans to overthrow the Ashikaga shogunate became known in 1331, he fled Kyoto under cover of darkness. To protect the treasures, a carriage was prepared and the regalia placed inside, draped in silk, so it seemed a court lady was riding within. From there, Go-Daigo moved from one mountain refuge to another, assisted by loyal samurai, most famously Kusunoki Masashige and Nitta Yoshisada. Yet another supporter would soon define the next stage of the conflict. Ashikaga Takauji, initially loyal, began to act against the emperor's wishes. When Nitta Yoshisada was sent to confront Takauji, he was defeated. Takauji marched on Kyoto and, after an initial setback, returned with overwhelming force. In 1336, he defeated Kusunoki Masashige at the Battle of Minatogawa, ending the life of Go-Daigo's most steadfast general. The emperor fled once more into the mountains, carrying the regalia with him. This time, however, he left behind copies of the sacred replicas. Takauji seized them and conducted the enthronement of the northern court nominee, Emperor Komyo, using the faux treasures. From that moment, the southern court claimed legitimacy through possession of the true replicas, while the northern court relied on the fakes. Go-Daigo died in exile in Yoshino in 1338, but the southern court continued its struggle, sustained by the younger generation of Kusunoki warriors. Notably, Masashige's son, Masatsura, died at the Battle of Shijo-Nawate in 1348. Resistance continued sporadically until 1383, when through the mediation of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the 2 imperial lines were finally reunited. The southern emperor, Go-Kamiyama, returned the regalia to Kyoto, honoring the agreement that succession would alternate between the northern and southern lines. Yet this plan was never implemented. The northern line retained the throne, beginning with Go-Komatsu, who succeeded Go-Kamiyama and continuing with his successors. By 1412, after several northern emperors had taken the throne, the imperial succession had been firmly established in the northern line, a line that continues to this day. Although the Nanbokucho Wars had officially ended with the return of the imperial regalia to Kyoto and the smooth accession of a single emperor, some isolated supporters of the southern court remained bitter. They argued that Prince Ogura, son of Emperor Go-Kameyama, should have inherited the throne instead of Emperor Shoko. When the prince died, they continued to support his successors, creating unrest for years, and for the first time since Dan no Ura, they again involved the imperial regalia in dramatic fashion. The first revolt came in 1413, led by Kitabatake Mitsumasa on behalf of Prince Ogura, but it was quickly crushed. Mitsumasa tried again in 1428, aiming to assassinate Shogun Ashikaga Yoshinori, but the plot was discovered before it could succeed. A third and final attempt occurred in 1443. At this time, the northern court was vulnerable because Shogun Yoshinori had been murdered 2 years earlier by the Akamatsu family for reasons unrelated to imperial succession. Seizing the opportunity, Kusunoki Masahide, a descendant of the legendary Kusunoki Masashige, launched a surprise attack on the imperial palace in the name of Prince Manjuji, the current southern heir. He captured the imperial regalia, the prince, and fled to the protection of the warrior monks of Mount Hiei. Pursued by Ashikaga samurai, Prince Manjuji ultimately took his own life. The replica mirror and sword were recovered, but Masahide escaped with the sacred jewel and the prince's 2 sons. Taking refuge in the mountains of Yoshino, Masahide declared the elder son, Prince Kitayama, emperor and his younger brother, shogun. Possession of the sacred jewel lent legitimacy to this last fragment of the southern court, allowing them to resist for 11 years. Their final downfall came in 1457. Samurai from the Akamatsu family, pretending to support the southern cause, infiltrated the mountains. Heavy snow masked their movements. One group attacked the imperial palace, while another assaulted the headquarters of the southern shogun. The emperor defended himself bravely but was killed. The assassins escaped with his head and the sacred jewel, but the snow blocked their path over Obagamine Pass. Exhausted, they buried the emperor's head in the snow overnight. The next day, local villagers attacked, forcing the assassins to flee and leaving the head behind. Blood seeping through the snow revealed its location, but the jewel was returned safely to Kyoto and has remained part of the regalia ever since. During the Onin War of 1467-77, the Yamana family briefly presented a so-called Southern Emperor in an attempt to counter the blatant manipulation of the real emperor by their rivals, the Hosokawa. Yet there was no one willing to fight for him, and from that moment on, pretenders to the Japanese throne vanished from history. The great trio of unifiers, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, needed no imperial nominees or crown jewels. Their authority came directly from the barrel of a gun. Still, history has one strange footnote. In 1945, no fewer than 17 men suddenly appeared, claiming to be rightful emperors who alone understood Japan's true destiny. Among them, a Nagoya shopkeeper named Kumazawa Kando even caught the attention of General Douglas MacArthur. He claimed descent from the southern court and insisted he had greater authority than Emperor Hirohito to decide whether Japan should surrender. As for the imperial regalia, the replica mirror and the original jewel made a dramatic journey from Kyoto to Tokyo in 1868. When Emperor Meiji was enthroned, the decision was made to move the capital to Edo, the former seat of the shogunate. Today, the items are housed in the imperial palace. The original mirror remains at the Ise-naiku, while the original grass-mowing sword lies at Atsuta Shrine in Nagoya. The sacred replica sword, of course, remains at the bottom of the sea off Dan no Ura, if it has not already succumbed to rust. Thus the treasures survive yet remain unseen. As the appendix to the Heike Monogatari reminds us, this makes Japan very special. Regarding the jewel, Though the sentiment applies to all three treasures, this casket is never opened, so that no one has seen what is in it. Emperor Go-Reizei, for some reason, tried to open the casket, but the moment he lifted the lid, a white cloud rose from within it. Japan may be a small country, but in this, it surpasses even the greatest nations. If the emperor himself, the lord of the mightiest powers, is not permitted to see it, how should ordinary people, much less those of lesser rank? Even today, the crown jewels remain symbols of authority and mystery, untouchable, unseen, and eternally sacred. Even after centuries of wars, betrayals, and upheavals, the crown jewels of Japan have endured, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of emperors and samurai alike. They are more than treasures. They are the soul of a nation, linking past and present in a thread of mystery and reverence. No eye has seen them, yet their presence shapes history and legitimacy with a power that words cannot capture. In this, Japan's sacred regalia remind us that some things are beyond human grasp, meant to be respected, not possessed. The story of these treasures is a story of Japan itself, enduring, enigmatic, and forever untouchable. The next part of this series will be released in the upcoming weeks, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll also be exploring legendary figures like Napoleon and Alexander the Great soon. If there's any part of history you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments.